it's historical fiction, so I didn't take everything word for word and put exactly how it's listed out in Exodus. I kind of put my own little flair on it to try to communicate to kids that they don't have to get good first. Jesus makes them good.
You're listening to Car Seat Questions, a podcast for parents of curious kids. I'm Lauren.
And I'm Eddie. And if you're anything like us, you either have a kid or you care for a kid with questions. Questions about all sorts of things.
So, for the next half hour, hop into the passenger seat, buckle your belt, and become childlike with us as the Lord takes us where He wants us to go.
Enjoy the show.
Okay. Hi, Miriam. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. How are you guys?
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining us today. If you want to start off just by telling our listeners a little bit about who you are, what you enjoy, maybe something like a fun fact, so let's get to know you.
Sure. I recently moved to the Atlanta area with my family. We are originally from the central Illinois area, so this is a big change for us. We're used to the cornfields and the small towns, so seeing the big buildings and the mountains and rivers and lakes and all that, it's really fun. My husband and I have been married for 8.5 years. We have a 7-year-old and an almost 6-year-old. We were high school sweethearts. We like to do things outdoors, board games, biking, hiking, all those things.
Eddie's a big board game guy.
I am. I do enjoy board games very much.
Yeah. What's your favorite board game?
That's a really good question. So I don't know if you do any modern board gaming. There's a game that I really like. It's called Seven Wonders.
I love that game.
Okay, great.
So
all right, I'm glad you know about it.
I played it on Saturday.
Yeah.
We haven't played in a long time. We should probably play.
Yeah, it has been a long time. But when we first got the game, we taught some of our friends how to play, and I think we met up like once a week
for
a long time, and we would play that game for hours.
Yes.
So good.
Yeah, such a good time. And sometimes my friend reminds me that we did that, and so he'll send me a text like, hey, we played this game this week, it was so cool. So yeah, that's probably my favorite game. And Lauren is not a huge board game person, but that was like the one game she would play with me. So
I taught you how to play.
She taught me how to play. That's right.
Wow.
That's right. You better tell him.
She's probably the reason for my board game.
Great.
Not addiction, hobby. We're gonna call it a hobby, because that's what it is.
It is a hobby. That's
nice.
Well, we have you here today because you wrote a children's book.
I did.
All about Moses and the burning bush. Can you kind of share with us and with our listeners, why you chose the title, A Thick Whisper of Grace, and why the story as well?
Sure. I'll answer the second question first.
Yeah.
I chose the story of Moses just because, honestly, he's my favorite Bible character.
Yeah.
And his story has always been one that I related to. I think as a child, I enjoyed his story because it was action-packed, and there was Prince of Egypt came out when I was a kid, and that was such a monumental movie, and
great soundtrack.
It's such a good soundtrack. It holds up. I showed it to my kids a couple weeks ago, and they were like, Mom, this is a good movie. It's old, but it's good.
Oh, that's so good to know.
Now we get to pull it out again. So anyways, so honestly, that's why I chose the story of Moses. I relate a lot to him as a person. He's very worried about what other people thought about him, very quick to disqualify himself from being used by God, very shame-oriented kind of person. Didn't like to be in the limelight, like to kind of be behind the scenes, even though God was perpetually pulling him out of that.
Yeah.
So that's why I chose the story of Moses and the burning bush. And then I chose the title because it's probably my favorite line from the book. It's when the burning bush is talking to Moses, and right before he starts speaking truth into all the lies that he's believing about himself, it says that Yahweh leaned in and breathed a thick whisper of grace. So I just wanted it to feel like pull you into the page, pull you into the moment, and imagine what it would be like to be talking to Yahweh and to hear for the first time who you really are when you've been believing a lot of things that aren't true about who you are.
Yeah. What made you want to make this a children's book?
I wanted to write a children's book, honestly, because I was just tired of reading books to my kids that made the Bible characters look like superheroes, people that were unrelatable, people who you're supposed to clean up your act and then start acting like David. You're supposed to clean up your act and then start acting like Moses. And the reason why God used them was because they were amazing and they were so brave and so strong and so charismatic. And one of my favorite themes throughout the Bible is that those people in the Bible were used specifically because they couldn't do things on their own.
Yep.
And they're very open and honest with the ways that they fall short. They didn't leave things out. If Moses wanted to make it look like he was a superhero, Exodus would not look like Exodus.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's kind of why I started dabbling in it. I started just kind of like doodling things and putting some things together. And then my husband was like, you should just like write a book for the girls. Like, just do it for them. And if it's something, then it's something. If it's not, it's not. And so I did.
Wow. That's awesome. What do you feel like in your research of the story or your rereading of the story before you wrote this is like the underlying theme that you want kids and their parents to take from this book or in this story of Moses?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing I'd like them to take away would be God's grace and weakness. The fact that he uses people who are broken and who couldn't do things on their own to make sure that he gets the glory for what he does. And it's historical fiction, so I didn't take everything word for word and put exactly how it's listed out in Exodus. I kind of put my own little flair on it to try to communicate to kids that they don't have to get good first. Jesus makes them good.
Yeah.
And it's God's love that changes us. You don't have to change in order to get the love.
Yeah, I think I was looking through the book yesterday and today, and something that was really interesting to me was just how you started the book, because again, I think a lot of people oftentimes forget, right, what Moses did before he fled Egypt, and that's like kind of how you started the book. And even though you don't explicitly say like what he did, I think oftentimes like we forget that like he ran away because of what happened, and of course that like tails into the meat of the story. But I thought that was really cool and interesting that the story starts off that way, because I think we oftentimes forget that Moses probably felt a lot of guilt and shame, right? And that also kind of explains a lot of his posture, right, when he confronts the burning bush.
When you are maybe reading this to your girls or to other kids, or you've heard other parents reading this to their kids, what are the kids picking up about shame, and in the story of Moses about his shame, and maybe what have you seen in their lives about how they're portraying shame or how they're feeling about it?
Sure. So my two girls are the most opposite human beings that could ever come from the same gene pool. Like, even visually, people ask if they're adopted, like, because they just look nothing alike, they act nothing alike. What's interesting about their personalities, though, is like they both struggle with shame. I think it's just like an inherent part of the brokenness of the world being a fallen place. But they definitely present it in different ways. My oldest, she just takes all the shame, she shoves it deep down and acts like she has it all together, similar to the way that I did. And my second one is very vocal with her shame. And she's like, I'm the worst person in the whole world. God's never going to love me. I'm terrible. I'm horrible. I made a mistake and now I'm bad. And it's really interesting to try to parent both kinds of people, especially when you overly relate to one. And so you're trying to focus really, really hard on making sure they don't end up like you.
Yeah, that they don't do the same things. Yeah.
Exactly. And then the other one, you're just like, I can't, why would you say these things? Why would you say these things about yourself? If some other kid was saying these things about you, I'd be like, you're not allowed to be friends with them anymore.
Yeah.
You have to be careful about the words that you tell yourself, because that's the voice that you hear perpetually. So I think something that they've learned in the story, specifically A Thick Whisper of Grace, is just a general theme of my parenting that I've tried to incorporate is you don't have to um, you don't have to be good enough for God. God was good enough for you. And I wanted to make sure that it wasn't communicating like antinomian theology, where like then they're like, oh, great, so now I can do whatever I want to do. So that was one of my reasons for putting the discussion questions in at the end, just so that you can kind of like process and talk through God's unconditional love being such a huge blessing and so such a wonderful gift, while at the same time like saying like this is how it should change your life.
Yeah. We know a kid who would do the same, of like run away and feel outwardly so much shame, and it's like no one, you know, is saying that about you, but like how you're feeling, like no one has ever said those things about them, but it's like how you, like you said, how you talk about yourself is like how you start to view yourself and your inner voice for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Our son is only 3, and so he's not quite dealing with like a full feelings of shame yet, but it's like starting. He's very empathetic to feelings in the room of like what other people are feeling. And so he's really in a phase of asking what we're feeling like every 5 minutes. So I'll be like, Mom, are you sad? Mama, are you angry? Mom, are you happy? Until he gets to the right one. And he's like, oh, yeah, she said yes. And it was just yesterday. Was that yesterday? 2 days ago? We just had a little bit of a rough morning, you know, a toddler morning. And I was putting him down for his nap. And so he said, Mama, are you sad? And I said, no, I'm not sad. And he said, Mom, are you frustrated? And I said, yeah, I'm kind of frustrated. It's just been like a hard morning. He said, are you a little bit angry too? And I said, yeah, I am a little bit angry because it's just, we're having a hard time communicating this morning. He goes, aw, I'm sorry, Mama. Because he's just starting to realize like, oh, the things that I was doing today were not making someone else happy. So it's not quite shame, but it's like inching there of feeling like, oh, I did something I shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
And it made someone else feel bad, or it affected somebody else in my life, and it's not just about me. So it's going to be interesting to like walk through shame with him, and I'm looking forward to being able to talk with him about that.
Yeah, I think he's becoming aware that like the things that he does affects people. But he doesn't want, and this is probably again kind of like probably where the shame comes. Like he doesn't want people to feel bad, right? Or to feel sad or mad at the things that he's done. So like, yeah, he's starting to put like 2 and 2 together. Like, oh, like now my actions make people feel a certain type of way, and he doesn't like it when it's, you know, sad or angry or frustration. But again, we want to be able to identify these things, right? So that he does begin to understand that, hey, like things you do, they have, you know, repercussions, whether good or bad.
Yeah.
What are some things that you want other kids through this book, or even just if you were to able to teach children about shame and grace, what are some truths that you would want them to know about grace and about God's grace for them?
I would say that I think it's important for kids to learn young the truth about who God is and who they are because of who God is. A lot of people our age are now going to therapy and doing a lot of work trying to deconstruct the lies that were constructed at age 7. And I think awareness of the fact that they're in this phase of literally building their worldview, whatever you do or don't do right now has the potential to impact your child's worldview for the rest of their life. I guess not to put a ton of pressure. I mean, there's already a ton of pressure in parenting, but like it's worth prioritizing, I think. So how I think that applies is that if you start early, you can teach kids that they don't need to disqualify themselves from being used by God just because they see their own brokenness. And I think it's a great opportunity for us as parents to kind of compare and contrast ourselves with God. I think humility in parenting is so underrated. We feel like if our kids see us as human beings, then they won't obey us. They won't listen to us. And that really doesn't do your kid any good, because naturally kids project the characteristics of usually their most assertive or most involved parent onto God. And so if you come off as someone who struggles with being humble and all the other sinful things that we exhibit just as parents, then I think it just does our kids a disservice. But if we take the opportunity to differentiate ourselves from God and say, here are all the ways mommy messed up this week, but you know who doesn't mess up? God. You know who you can fully depend on? God. He is so good. He is so amazing. And it'll kind of like help them differentiate the two so that they can have a healthy spiritual relationship with God when they're young adults, while they're trying to process their childhood for the first time.
Right.
And seeing kind of having that raised awareness of, wow, my parents were just people. They were just people, large children raising children, right?
Yeah.
That's all adults are. So I think that's what I would like kids to learn. I think something important for parents to consider.
We had a conversation recently like that of, we worry about kids inheriting maybe like an illness or a disease or something that we have, but also they can inherit like our sin patterns. And whether that's just because that's like our makeup of who we are, but also that's what they see. That's like, they see that every day. Even if you're not meaning to show that, we're showing that as parents. And on one hand, like you said, being willing to be like, yeah, I messed up and this is my sin issue and I need to work on it. But I also don't want you to have that too. And I think for me, I struggle a lot with like law versus grace and being too hard on myself and being too much of a rule follower, and also holding other people to those standards and not tapping so much into the grace portion. And it's like, when I think about it in terms of my children, like, I don't want my children to feel that. I want my children to know that there is abounding grace and love for them, no matter the mistakes they make, no matter if they follow all the rules or not. And so I need to start weeding that out in myself first, of being more of a follow the rules, follow the law, you must do all these things, there's no grace type of person, and being more grace filled and accepting the grace that God has given me too, and not holding myself to thinking that I can, do everything and get it all done just by my own actions and words.
Yeah, and I also don't want our kids to think that we're perfect, right? Just because we're parents, right? And there's kind of like this weird thing of like, oh, well, your kids need to know that, you they can't see that you've like messed up, or they can't see that you also struggle with stuff. But then it's like, what is our representation then to them, right? If they just think, oh, well, my mom and dad don't ever do anything wrong.
They don't make mistakes.
It's like, well, no, that's actually quite the opposite. And again, the fear is understandable. That's something that I struggle with too. It's just like, man, like I don't want to inherit, like generational sin or things that like my parents did or like went through. And sometimes because of our makeup, it's almost inevitable. That doesn't mean that it can't change, right? Or we can't work at it to fix it with our family. But yeah, I think that was a really good conversation I think we had, because there's always two sides of it, right? There's the fear, which again is totally valid, but then it's like, again, we don't want our kids to think that we don't ever struggle with anything ever.
Yeah. And speaking of grace, in that, one of my most impactful realizations as a parent has been that God specifically wanted you to be your child's parent. And both of you, your sin patterns, his sin patterns, they work together to create the human being that God wants your child to be. And he doesn't waste pain and he doesn't waste sin, and he uses it all for his glory. And it feels like it like lifts that weight of like, okay, yes, I should prioritize it. I should help them build a healthy foundation, all of these things, but I'm not going to do it perfectly. And at the end of the day, the more room, the more sin there is, a lot of times, the more opportunities there are for God to come in and redeem.
Yep, absolutely. And that we're not, he wasn't surprised. He knew who we were. He knows who we are as parents and who we are as individuals. And he still gave us these children to raise and entrusted us with them, even with our sinful patterns. You put some discussion questions at the end of the book. What kind of questions did you put in there, and what are you hoping parents and kids learn or are able to, or maybe what conversations come from these discussion questions?
Yeah. So my reasoning was kind of twofold. One, I wanted to offer up some age-appropriate theology for kids, just so that they can explain in ways that are simple, that make sense to them, that can help them build that foundation, can pop up in their heads throughout their day as they're dealing with things, just to kind of know the truth about who God is. And then also I added in some more emotionally focused questions, I guess. Just say, Moses felt this way. Have you ever felt that way before? And kind of just like getting the ball rolling for parents to be able to have those emotionally vulnerable conversations with their kids.
Yeah.
I think that because we as parents, we take our background and we say, well, my parents did this way and this that way, and I want to find out my way. And we don't make a plan for it, but we would like to do it. And basically my thought with the discussion questions was that I wanted to give parents a tool that they can use to just read through and get the ball rolling. Because at times it does feel awkward, especially if you just go to church on Sunday and you don't really talk about God at home. That feels really weird. It feels strange to start talking to your kids about that stuff. And there's grace for that. And so having questions and having having tools like these discussion questions, I think, could be really beneficial for families.
Where can people find your book if they would like to get it for themselves, or a grandparent wants to get it for grandchildren or to have it at their house? Where can people find that?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. And then it's also on Barnes & Noble and a couple of other online websites. So
awesome. Again, for the listener, that is A Thick Whisper of Grace by Miriam Arnold. Thank you, Miriam, for being with us and for taking time to talk with us. I'm excited to be able to share this book with our son. We haven't yet, but I'm excited to be able to read it to him, add more books to our same ones that we read all the time.
Our growing library.
Yes. Yeah, so thanks so much for being with us. It was a pleasure to talk with you. For our listener, we would love for you to rate, review, and subscribe on wherever you get your podcast. Episodes drop every Wednesday, so be sure to check back into your feed so that you can never miss an episode. Thanks so much.
And with Miriam, with every one of our episodes, we'd like to close with a benediction. So if you would please join us in that. To him who is able to do far more than we can understand, may he give us the wisdom to raise our children to first love God above all else and love others as themselves. Go in peace. Thanks for joining us this week on the Car Seat Questions podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment, and just let us know what you thought.
Be sure to follow us on YouTube, wherever you find your podcasts, Instagram, TikTok, basically anywhere, and drop your comments below about what you thought about the episode.